Welcome, everybody. This month we are really slowly raising the expectations for peer learning. And last week we talked about describe, evaluate, suggest as a scaffold for comments, right? It's a pattern that you can use when you write the explicit instructions for contextual comments inside your review, but it's also a framework you can use when you're modeling comments that students have given each other to follow up on a peer review that has happened. It's also a way for you to encourage students to use the helpfulness ratings. So this week I'm going to take that same framework, describe, evaluate, suggest, and I'm going to help you use it to think about designing reviews. So as a reminder, describe, evaluate, suggest comes from Bill Hart Davidson, one of Eli Review's co-inventors, and it is just a pattern of thinking about what are the parts that students need to include to be helpful, right? So the description move is just to say back, this is what I think you're aiming for, this is what I think you've accomplished. Evaluation is how close are you to achieving the agreed upon criteria, and then the suggestion is how do you improve this weakness, or how do you build on this strength? So we want to think about feedback as being both strengths and weaknesses. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to cover 2 example reviews as a model of thinking about describe, evaluate, suggest in review task construction. And then I'm going to show you how to build a review and how to think through the parts as you put your own assignments in. So we're going to start with the Science Journal Summary Writing Assignment from Professor Vanessa Woods at University of California, Santa Barbara. She worked with Linda Adler-Kastner and Maggie Safranova in the Center for Teaching and Learning to develop this assignment. And so is this kind of large enough that you can see, or make it a little bit larger? Is that better? Is that good? Good. Okay, I got a thumbs up. Thank you. And so what students did is they had to find and then summarize a journal article in their particular field, in their research area of study. And then the peer review has a couple of parts. So in the describe section, it's the trait identifications. Does the draft have these minimum requirements? And the writing task, it will not surprise those of you who know Linda Adler-Kastner, a former president of 4Cs, so that's the professional organization for writing teachers, that the writing prompt had these explicit guidelines about how many sentences are necessary for each part. So the writers had seen this, and then reviewers are just checking it to be sure there's enough information on each purpose of the summary. The evaluation stage then moves to an overall rating to ask students to to rate the quality of the summary. And you see how 5 stars is high quality and 3 stars is in good shape and 1 is missing critical elements. What happened in this review is what you would predict, right? For most students, they skewed high because 3 looks great, right? And 5 looks achievable. So this is one thing to notice about this particular review, is that 3 did not look like where most people should be. 5 seemed like where most people should be. So the review was kind of skewed high there. And then the last thing I want you to notice about this review is the contextual comments. So this is the suggest piece of designing a review. And notice how explicit this is. There are 4 different comments, and each one has a template, and that means that reviewers don't have to think about which criteria to talk about or how to start their feedback kindly. So as you look at this review of summary writing, where there are a description area for the minimum requirements, an evaluation that's just a star rating on overall, and then really explicit suggestion for how the comment should be written. What strikes you about this design?
Feels really accessible. It feels like if I were doing this feedback, I wouldn't feel like it was a daunting task. Like the fact that the templates are there, that I could just plug them in. Yeah, just feels very like doable and achievable.
Thanks, Lee. So the amount of feedback that you're guided to give doesn't feel like too much, and you feel like you know what to do, and it feels like you could sort of make progress. Yep, all the things are there. The rating is pretty simple, and then the comments are really laid out for you. Other reactions to this review of summary writing? I'll take extended silence as you're good with this one. So let me show you a second review. This is a review on organization. And organization is the hardest thing to teach writers to improve. So when you want to teach organization, it is the only thing you can teach. Don't add other goals to that lesson. Just focus on organization. And this review looks like the other one in its components. So let me walk through that. Again, some of you have come in late, so I'll just kind of give you a snapshot of what we're doing. The description move when you're designing a review takes place in a trait identification set. You're just asking reviewers to say, yeah, I see that, or it's missing, right? So this one has a description of the kind of superficial level of what indicates good organization. There's headings, the purpose is clear, the first and last sentences of paragraphs suggest that there's coherence in the paragraph, there's clear transitions within, and there's clear transitions within the paragraphs and between paragraphs. So these are the superficial indicators that organization is present. The next piece is evaluation. So we ask students, how is the text clearly organized? And notice that this star rating is written in reverse order. So it builds from 1 star all the way to 5 stars. That's something you can think about as you communicate with students about the star rating to help them not skew high, right? To use 3 or whatever your middle number is as the midpoint for most drafts. Then in this draft, and unlike the other one, the comments are not scripted, but they are elaborate. So when you teach organization, you need students to be careful readers. So the ninja move in this review is to ask students to annotate each paragraph with the gist, right? To literally write out in full sentences the gist of the paragraph in their own words. And it's modeled here, sample 1, sample 2, but what they're supposed to do is annotate each paragraph. And once they've done that, right, annotated each paragraph, they've got basically the outline of the paper in their comment feed, and so will the writer. So it's like building a reverse outline for the writing teachers in the room, right? Like this will generate that reverse outline. But that positions students to do this much harder thing of organization, and that is to look at the pieces that are there and to say, this needs to be moved, this needs to be added, this needs to be taken out. They can't see that when they're looking at the draft itself. They need to see that when they're looking at their little annotations and whatnot. So by asking students to do hard work in contextual comments and final comments, then that will, we hope, prompt them to adjust their star rating and to rethink whether these really quick and dirty indicators of organization are actually as present as they thought they were. So what strikes you about this review? Things you like, things you don't like.
I really like the idea of the contextual comments as annotations, just kind of reinforces responding as a reader, and that whole aspect of peer review.
Great, thank you. Yeah, annotations are easy, and that it helps students to, you know, their job isn't judgment, right? They're just annotating. What do you see here? What's the gist? Other reactions to this organization review?
why not have the stars later? I mean, if you want them to do the hard work, is it, why have the scaled responses before the contextual comments?
That's a great question. It's a limitation of the current app that the order of question types is always and forever trait identification checklist, star ratings, Likert ratings, and then comments. So if you could move things around, surely we would put that star rating at the end, but you can't. So you have to sort of think about that as a constraint of the app. Other things that strike you as you look at this review?
I wanted to comment on the template aspect of the contextual comments, because I know when I do that, it really helps them write really great reviews. But I've also had some students feel like they were getting cut and paste responses. And they don't always help. So sometimes students fill in the blanks in less than thoughtful ways. So I'm torn on it. I think it helps, but also there are some problems with providing the templates or limitations that we have to address as teachers.
Agreed. Anybody else want to chime in about how the templates work against good work sometimes? Or things you've tried?
I sometimes feel like, and I'm in the context of being early in the semester right now and students giving next to nothing in feedback, it's super helpful to have these templates early on, and I've taken to using the scaffolding approach later in the semester, letting it fall away or making smaller templates like that. But I'm with Kristen. It's like our students don't know how to give good feedback, and so we're providing them with the model, with the template. You could do it this way. You know, when Kristen was talking, I was thinking you could add to the template if you wanted to. Furthermore, I think ... and see where they go with it. I've not done that. The idea just popped into my head.
I think what I hear in Kristen's comment is that some students are going to use the template to fill in a blank, and they're not going to do the work the blank is asking them to do, right?
Right.
And that is just part of students engaging in peer learning and in courses and in homework in different levels. And so the question as the instructor is, how much dialing it in do you have in your class versus how many students are doing strong work because the scaffold enables them to work higher than their current skills. And so that's the balance you're trying to judge, right? Do you have too many dialer inners, or do you have students who are really benefiting from this, from the scaffold? And that's kind of where you decide. This is certainly something that happens only at the beginning of the term. After mid-semester, you don't want to be supplying these kind of explicit templates. But if you are doing only 1 or 2 reviews, or the reviews you are doing are weeks apart, you're always going to do better to provide extensive comment templates, because students aren't learning to get better at giving better feedback, and they don't remember that lesson from 3 weeks ago. So this is, again, a cognitive load device of giving students everything they need to do a good work right here on the page. So let me switch gears and show you how you can use one of the templates inside Eli Review to build a review that follows this kind of mental model of describe, evaluate, suggest. Some of you were in the workshop that I led at San Francisco State on the transparency in learning and teaching framework. So that is a script for a writing prompt. And so the review I'm showing is just the peer review version of that writing prompt. And the way you get to it is you would come into your course and you'd create a new review task, and then you're going to load from library. That's the gray button in the top right of your screen. and then you're going to search for tilt. Now you will only have one, I have half a dozen, but the one is you pull from the curriculum repository and load, and that is your copy of this review. And the first thing you want to do is change the title. So it would be something like, I don't know, peer feedback on whatever genre, right? Something meaningful so that you can really tell what it is. In Eli, you have to have a due date for everything, and so then you give it a due date for everything, and then you just save your draft. And now we're going to work through it together. So the something to notice about this review that you pull in is, sorry, the review task that you pull in is that it is ready to go with at least one piece of it. So the purpose and skills and knowledge is a key part of the TILT model, and I've pre-written all of that for a generic peer learning task for you. So that part is done. You would just modify this knowledge part. So what is the content, or what are the particular skills that you're practicing in addition to generic stuff here? So you would change that there. And then the questions have the trait identifications built out, again, using generic language that you would just replace, and I'll show you that in a second. But you want to think about the trait identifications. You can describe a draft using the minimum requirements of your writing prompt. So if you have a word count or a page count or whatever, if you have different requirements, all of those can just go into your minimum requirement buckets. You could also have something about the features. So if it needs to include an image, or if it needs to include a hook, or if it needs to include a counter argument, those are kind of features that you could ask reviewers to look for and say yes, no to. The topics one is probably, not everybody is going to need this one, but for example, if you want a student to elaborate on how a concept applies here, here, and here, right? Or something that requires them to develop a topic. There might be a topic requirement that you could list here. And then there's an area for common problems. So let me just show you how you would make that change. It's loaded into your course now. It's your copy. And you would just click Edit, and then you would put your little cursor over here and change it from word count to pages, right? And update. And you can leave the tallied response. This is just going to tell the app to count the number of total peer votes, and that's just going to help you. It's not going to show to students, so that can be really easy there. So all the trait identifications work the same way. You could edit this list and say, I don't really want to do anything about errors. I don't want students to pay attention to that at all. So you can delete that set and get rid of that one. Of course, I can't do it while you're watching, but you delete all that stuff and it would, you can delete that. There we go. There we go. Delete, there's the delete. You can delete and say, I don't want that one. And it's really gone and you can't get it back. So just know that when it's gone, it's really gone. The Likert scale here is possible. You can, oh, I accidentally deleted the star rating. How fun is that? The star rating went away, but the Likert scale is here. So if you have a rubric, then you take each row in your rubric and each row becomes a Likert scale, an individual scale, and each item is a cell. So whatever your low cell is, whatever your high cell is, you fill those in, and that is the plug and play for putting your rubric inside Eli. Each row is its own Likert there. And then you can use the contextual comment. This is the generic one that you've seen before. It asks for a minimum number of comments. It says in words, describe, evaluate, suggest, and links to Bill's taco video. It also has sample comments that are for praise and for critique. The final comment that is built into this review asks reviewers to assume that the writer is going to do 30 minutes of revision and ask them to spell out tasks and time that add up to 30 minutes worth of revision work. So that is scaffolding students in planning revision activity across time. So how does looking at the review task this way as a set of things you get students to describe, a set of things you get students to evaluate, and then a set of suggestions? How does that help you think about review tasks?
I find thinking about the Likert ratings as elements of my rubric very, very helpful. Yeah, I'm going to put that into play immediately. Thank you for that.
Sure. Good, Colin. Other things you noticed or learned or liked or hated?
But it seems to me that it reinforces the describe, evaluate, suggest on a sort of larger scale, which is nice and useful.
Good.
Yeah, I want to follow up with what Ryan said because it was what I was thinking. It's sort of subtle and eloquent the way it's modeling, but not an explicit way, the kind of thinking that goes into good critiques. In other words, the old way, at least in my book 5 or 6 years ago, it was, what did you like about this draft? But this was my rubric. What did you like and what did you find problematic or needs help? 2 questions and they go to town and it doesn't work out. This is like, you can't help but start thinking this way by doing it, and no one is pounding, you don't have a teacher in front of you saying, now I want you to use DES. But that'll happen again a little bit later. I just see the learning cycle happening with this.
Perhaps it's a little too subtle, but yeah, yes, there is some, I'll borrow Ryan's, there's a little eloquence here too, once you sort of get it, to think about your responsibility as the instructor for putting the words students need for effective description, for effective evaluation, for effective suggestions. You have a responsibility to make that easy for them here. And so I want to just recap with this notion. So if you're in the slide deck, on this really terribly busy slide, you can see the steps of getting to that review if you wanted to borrow it. And remember, when you borrow it, you're going to change most everything. Only the instructions that are the goals and purpose will pretty much stay the same, but you'll have to replace that like feature 1, feature 2 stuff with things that apply to you. But these are the steps if you've forgotten how to create the task load from library. Search for TILT, which stands for Transparency in Learning and Teaching. And then this is just your mental model. Always describe, evaluate, suggest. You have 2 kinds of evaluation, the STAR or the Likert. Really up to you in what they produce. And here's your other reminder. A good review task has to be so clear that a weak writer gets everything they need to be a helpful reviewer from the task itself. So when you look at your own reviews, this is your metric, right? A writer who wrote the weakest draft, could they use the guidance I've given them in describing the features, the minimum requirements, the topics, the common errors, in evaluating, coming to a good judgment about that draft, and then offering a suggestion? Could they use my review to be a helpful reviewer, even if they were off pace as a writer? So let's go back to Carlos and Boyd from last week. Describe, evaluate, suggest is our big strategy for helping students learn to make better judgments about their own work and the work of others. So what strikes you about how this can help you help students build their capacities?
Well, I see the making judgments box is highlighted, and definitely the trait list kind of helps them to make judgments. It tells them what to look for, and that gives them a purpose for reading. So it helps them to identify problems or things that are working in the paper.
Thank you, Kristen.
And I'll go with the 2 not highlighted boxes because I'm so sensitive to students' history not receiving helpful feedback, feedback that helps them move forward over a few weeks of instilling this. As more students give more robust feedback, everyone's going to be feeling better and everyone's going to be looking forward to this feedback and wanting to use it rather than shrugging and say, this wasn't helpful.
Well, I'd say if the whole method of getting and receiving feedback is more transparent, then the affect will be improved. Students will understand that feedback that they're receiving is not personal. You know, if they can see the mechanism better through which they're receiving the feedback.
That's great. See the mechanism and it won't feel like a personal judgment. It'll feel like learning. Good. Other reactions to the ways we can use Eli to help students get better at making judgments?
I would just chime in. I would say that I like the Likert scales and the star ratings as a way to kind of take some of the pressure off of making judgments by just being able to see an easy click, more or less, and then using those trait identifications to make that judgment. So
Yep.
I will use that. Thank you.
Great. We do find that the stars, students have an intuitive grasp of stars, but 5 stars, they tend to skew more than 10 stars. So if you want spread, you got to give them more stars to spread out on. Otherwise, they kind of cluster towards 4 on that.
I've definitely seen that. I did the 10-star thing for the first time and I was like, oh, I'm getting a lot more middle responses.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, go to 10 stars. We used to have 25 stars, but that was just insane. So now we're down to 10 and people seem to be able to have a mental model of 10 stars somehow. So on the slide deck, I've given you some resources that if you're not familiar with scaffolding, then you might like Adam Boxer's blog post on guidance fading, and he gives a very particular example that's lovely. There's also some resources on threshold concepts, which are the thing you're trying to get students to practice. And so that is key before you design the review. If you don't know the thing you're trying to teach, you can't design a review that's going to teach them that thing. So I've given you some threshold stuff. And then there's also the Tilt Higher Ed model here. We've also got the materials you can load from library. And so I'll check. I saw some chat about you guys can't access the Tilt review. So I'll check on that and report back on that. Let me just give you a reminder that at San Francisco State, today is a big day for withdrawal. And so if you have students who withdraw on the iLearn side or on the course side, you have to suspend them in Eli. And that will automatically send the student an email to say, you have been suspended from such and such class. If they're not prepared for that, they will email you back, right? So you can sort of know that that email is going to go out. And the reason you want to do that is so that they will be pulled out of the group formation tool, so that you're not constantly putting them into groups even though they haven't done any work. It'll also pull them out of the analytics, which will improve your completion rates. So go ahead and just note that today is an important day at San Francisco State for withdrawal. Use your suspend plan. Next week, we're going to transition. The last 2 weeks of February will be on revision plans. So I'm going to stop the recording.